Hey there, this is Chris from PC Gamer, and I'm here with Kret, caster, commentator, and coach, to talk about the second day of play at the Smite World Championship. We've seen two more teams eliminated today in the first two quarterfinal games, followed by the semifinals, which decided which teams went on to the grand final. So our first game today was Titan versus the Brazilian team. I love bacon. We love bacon. They collectively love bacon. How did you feel it went?
Well, it was a really interesting game. Really the first match of the two, as it was a 2-0 victory for Titan, was the one to look at. And We Love Bacon had some good starts. They had some good plays, but Titan showed that they had regained composure from their loss on day one. They were looking good going forward into day two. Especially the jungle play out of Repicos was looking really strong, and Titan just started off the day right, and I think it was instrumental in how they were able to come out and play later throughout the rest of the day.
That's the thing about Titan, right? They came out as the European first seed. A lot of hype behind them, but everyone was backing SK, the other European team, who seemed to be stronger basically through all of their games yesterday. Titan maybe not getting ahead in games where they should have won cleanly. What do you think happened overnight to bring out that performance today in those first games?
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting circumstance where the first seed is the underdog. SK Gaming is our LAN team. They just come out and they perform in LAN events. They boot camp really hard. They practice really hard. So they sort of seem like the natural favorite. But Titan are used to being underdogs. That's what they like to do. They play from behind. They are just ready to take people by surprise, and it felt like that's exactly what they were able to do today.
That second game against We Love Bacon was a commanding win for Titan, arguably their first commanding win of this tournament so far. Without spoiling what we're about to discuss,
Sure.
That's a theme that continued. To what extent do you think that's them kind of coming back into form? And to what extent is it them finally shaking off this underdog thing that, as you say, they kind of live with?
I think in part it was morale. I mean, game one, Titan was not completely clean, and game two, they were. And so they sort of hit their stride. They were strong throughout all phases of the game, and they just destroyed it. It was exactly what Titan needed, and I think it really prepared them to take on SK Gaming.
So going into a far more one-sided game, our second quarterfinal, which was COG Red, probably a lot of people's favorite going into this whole tournament, against the remaining Chinese team, OMG. Got to say, it wasn't very even. How do you feel did OMG even have a chance, I guess, against a team that strong?
Does anyone have a chance against a team that strong? I mean, COG Red is a world-class team. They feel like the benchmark for all other teams, where can you beat them, can you weather the storm, and OMG wasn't ready. Game one, they sort of stuck true to their guns. They played the way that we sort of expected to see from the way we've seen them play throughout the tournament, and that didn't work. It didn't even come close to working, and then game two, they tried to change it up, and COG Red was ready. COG Red read OMG like a book, and then they dismantled them and moved on to the semifinals.
So yesterday, OMG impressed, I think, by almost taking Titan. Not quite, and Titan felt like they were in control for most of the game, even when they were behind. But there were things about that game that felt like it might indicate what the future of Chinese Smite looks like. Do you think there was still a little glimmer of that today, or is it actually these guys have a lot to learn before they're ready to come back? And you would know, because you've worked extensively with those players and in China with a different team prior to this.
Yeah, I have worked with a Chinese team in the past, and I think in part it's just Red exploits China's weaknesses a little bit more than the other teams in the tournament. Red plays very aggressively with their rotations, and OMG just didn't seem able to read that, right? So you're sitting in middle lane, and your jungler goes to gank the duo lane. Well, you don't think that you're actually part of that gank, but because it's a team game, you need to make sure that you're taking care of your opposing mid laner so that they can't take part in that gank as well, so they can't counter it or anything like that. OMG wasn't able to respond to COG Red the way that they needed to.
Moving on to the semifinals. Our first semifinal was basically the European semifinal. We've ended up with a bracket which has Europe on one side and America on the other, guaranteeing a Europe-America grand final, at least. SK Gaming versus Titan. So in the press conference after the game, Captain Coach, the coach of Team Titan, pointed out that they lost 95% of their scrim games against SK, and SK are the team that they play the most. Yet they took a 2-0 victory that I don't think anybody expected. Where do you think that came from?
You know, I know one guy who expected it. Shout out to my man F. Dot, who has been calling the team that is now Titan since they weren't even sponsored, since they showed up in the amateur tournament. And what it comes down to, Titan just plays clean. They figure people out, and they take control of the game. Zeros picked Kali in both games, and Zeros did not do well with Kali in both games. Confrey played at a new level. He was out-rotating Maniac. He was a huge factor in team fights. And Ataraxia, in Game 1, destroyed Reels with Apollo against Rom, and in Game 2, destroyed Reels with Rom against Apollo. So clearly able to take both sides of that matchup and win it, which really shows you that Ataraxia was just playing out of his mind, and shockingly out of Reels X's league, as Reels is potentially the best hunter in Europe.
It's interesting because there's a lot of matchups there that everyone would say would go SK's way. Maybe not Replicas and Zeros, but definitely Confrey and Maniac, probably Reels and Ataraxia. And yet, in every case, those three matchups always went the way of Titan. Was that on the draft necessarily in each game? Was it on maybe cockiness on SK's part? Where do you think that particular upset originates?
I think it's the draft and the teams. I think part of the draft was taking advantage of Badger, forcing him onto Bacchus in Game 1. And I think he was Sylvanas Game 2. Didn't work out for him that well either. And I think in focusing Badger, you give lane advantage to Ataraxia. Reels then had a lot of trouble. And so it's sort of the draft combined with teamwork, combined with applying pressure to certain spots in the team, creating weak links, not even finding weak links, but sort of forcing them, and then taking advantage of that. Titan just had a plan. They executed it because I think I heard the record was out of 20 games, Titan won 1. Well, if you play a team 20 times, you're going to learn something.
Going into tomorrow's grand final, do you think Kanye Life is ever going to get to play Emir again?
I hope not. NA does not have Ymir players in their main season. I don't think it was picked at all in support in the SPL for North America. I just don't think they're ready for Ymir, and they shouldn't let it through. The problem is spending a first-round ban on Ymir seems a little costly. There's just so many other strong picks. So it'll be interesting to see what Prime does going up against Titan, but they were prepared for Titan in the past.
So moving on to the US semifinal, the two COG teams, COG Red and COG Prime. We just saw it end, actually, the first actual 3-game set of the day that actually went the entire way, and incredibly close. These are two teams that basically only play with each other to a substantial degree. They know each other inside out, and a lot of those games, the kill board was exactly matched throughout most of the game. What was it in the end, do you think, that allowed Prime, maybe not the second seed, and maybe not everyone, and the favorite going in, to take it and move on to the grand final?
I think the short story of the 3-game series is Game 1, Divius played Hercules, and Prime tried to kill him, and they couldn't. And that just sort of happens with Hercules. The solo play was there. The mechanics were there for Prime, but it just didn't come together as a strategy. And though Red was on the back foot in the later phases of the game, they were able to win a team fight and win the game off of it in its entirety. Going to Game 2, an unexpected Nox pick out of the middle lane, and Stealth just killed everybody. I mean, he just destroyed that game. He pretty much made Bush a non-factor, and he was very successful against Snoopy as well, which was super important. It was also interesting to see that Omega actually had the Hercules that time and was very tanky, just sort of taking it away from Divius more than using it himself. In Game 3, Prime found their footing, and they ran over COG Red as hard as you can run over a team that is just so good, right? It's it wasn't a stomp objectively, but to Red, it was a stomp. So I'm worried about them going into the Constellation match tomorrow. They have a lot of recovery to do. They've got a lot of thinking to do. And I think Prime has never felt better.
So going into that final then, I probably know what you're going to say, because we're here representing basically NA and EU, but against Titan, Titan and Prime played each other on the first day of play in a best of 1 that Prime won, forcing Titan into the quarterfinal directly. Who do you think is going to take it, and specifically, why?
So after I saw Titan win, I thought, okay, Red or Prime? Who has the better shot? And I think it's Prime. I think Titan would be able to figure out Red's playstyle better than Red knows their own playstyle. Just they feel like a team that sort of, instead of thinking about their game, they just play it and they feel it. And Titan is just they're so heady and so intellectual that I think they could figure it out and take it apart. Also, I think they would not be afraid to bore Divios, which is a very scary strategy. When Divios gets bored, I think he's more prone to making mistakes. Prime, on the other hand, they dismantled Titan in day one. They completely annihilated, they pulled them apart, and I think they're ready to do that in a best-of-5 series. Now, by the same token, Titan are the comeback kings. And it's a best-of-5 series, which is made for comebacks. There's so much more room than best-of-3, or especially best-of-1, so it'll be really interesting to see what happens. I would give it to Prime, but it's not going to be free.
I'd say that of the teams in this tournament, I'd agree with you that Prime are probably smarter overall, but Titan learn, and they change day on day. And Rare in esports, they actually get better throughout the tournament, substantially, and in some ways, like fundamentally, looking more confident. So for that reason, and basically regional bias, I'm gonna say Titan, but I agree and respectfully disagree with the Prime pick. Okay, we'll cut it there. We'll be back tomorrow for a roundup of the grand final itself. Thank you, Kret, for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for covering the tournament, and I hope you enjoy the rest of it.
Thanks, guys, and check out PCGamer.com for more on the Smite World Championship.